Hello and welcome to Discourse in Third Person, a podcast where we talk about video games, their narratives, and how they tell them. As always, I'm Josh, and this is Jeffrey.
Hey, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. How have you been?
Been reading up on my literature.
Well, I've been playing video games on my end. Speaking of which, are you familiar with a novel titled Heart of Darkness?
Only so far as you mentioned it.
Well, it just so happens there are actually a lot of adaptations of Heart of Darkness, a novel by Joseph Conrad. You know what? Some of those adaptations happen to be video games.
So, how would you adapt a novella to a video game, I guess is the question.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? And you know what? There, to my knowledge, and actually is the subject of today's episode, two that went out and attempted this adaptation, almost explicitly so, not only by the directors of said video games, but also by references within those video games. But not to beat around the bush, today we'll be talking about Far Cry 2. Hope you enjoy. So, in 1899, Joseph Conrad published his novella, Heart of Darkness, detailing a fictionalized version of his experiences as a steamboat captain. In the novella itself, it tells the story of Marlowe as he journeys through the quote-unquote heart of darkness to meet at this point in the novel, the much fabled and built-up Kurtz. Throughout the way, Marlowe experiences the landscape as this entity. And eventually, when he does meet Kurtz has become, as mentioned, a myth and a fable. And when he meets Kurtz, he has a revelation for himself. So, Jeffrey, what's your relationship with Heart of Darkness?
I mean, when I read it, it seemed to take a while to build up, and it really built up this Kurtz figure, as you said. And it seemed like a novella without a very good peak in terms of like the peak was right before you meet Mr. Kurtz, when you find out about the horrible and disgusting things that Mr. Kurtz was actual, pretty much war crimes.
Humanitarian disasters, yes.
Right. And then when you actually meet Mr. Kurtz, you find him to be a very incredibly disappointing, and he very shortly dies not too long after the main character meets him.
It's quite underwhelming, isn't it? The build up of Kurtz, the fables, the myths, as I mentioned, the people talking about him in hushed tones.
Yeah.
Right. You only really see the aftermath of his actions, really. Right.
Right. The amount of dialogue between the main character and Mr. Kurtz is a couple paragraphs long. There's not a lot of dialogue between the two of them.
I think there are more people talking about Kurtz than actually Kurtz talking in the...
Absolutely.
Yeah, so he was built up as this force, and so, but just because of his presence, right? He's a very important figure, not just because not just the novel, but in the narrative itself, because eventually Marlowe, when he does meet Kurtz, what grand what grand revelation did he really glean from Kurtz? All right, so Heart of Darkness. So what are your thoughts on Heart of Darkness, Jeffrey?
I mean, in terms of other thoughts I had, it's interesting that it really actually, as brutal as some of the elements are within the novella, it really undersells how brutal the Belgian-controlled Congo was.
Well, that's true. And we're venturing into reality at this point. Yeah. So Kurtz was actually was not a sanitized version, but definitely not as rough as reality actually is.
Right. I'm not certain what Joseph Conrad's rationale was. It was still, I think, a repudiation of the things that he did probably see in the Belgian Congo.
Right. The the brutalities that he witnessed,
Yeah,
it's not a particularly noble industry that he bore witness
yeah.
to. So okay,
And I mean, elephant hunting in general is
oh
just
yeah, that's true. The trade we're talking about, if you haven't read the novel, listener, it's about ivory. A lot of it was about ivory.
so. Yeah, Josh, what about your feelings on? You read this book quite a while ago and then reread it.
That's true. The last time prior to reading it, of course, for this revisitation, was when I was in college. It wasn't for any class or for some other motive aside from just I wanted to read it for leisure. My reasoning for reading it for leisure was I like and very much enjoy psychological horror. The idea that a person become something else than what they are, or they turn into what they truly are in the surface. So it's either there's a shift from what they went in and what came out is something different. And that change is something that I really like. Just seeing in narratives, right? And Heart of Darkness is about that. We have Kurtz, who came into the Heart of Darkness and came out something completely different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, would you say that there were not much in terms of the main character, right? I think, for me at least, the main character just seemed more of a the vessel for the reader rather than.
Yes and no.
But go ahead.
Yes and no. I mean, at the end, right? He does. So in the beginning of the novel, he says, and the way it's structured is it's him telling a story. So it's a nested narrative. So it's a person telling a story, and the novel itself is a story by that person in the novel. And so in the beginning of his story, Marlowe's story, he says that I don't like lying. He actually just he said straight up said I don't like lying. But at the end, if you remember, he ended up lying
Yes.
to Kurtz's fiance.
Yes.
He didn't come out of the Heart of Darkness himself unchanged. And in fact, when he came back to society, he saw it that he actually called the people around him, I believe, sheep or something to that effect. He looks down, there's a certain sense of, I wouldn't say superiority, but he feels different from the people surrounding him because he bore witness to something in the Heart of Darkness, and that changed him.
Well, I think that that's an interesting point right there. And I feel that kind of is not dissimilar to soldiers coming back from war.
Right.
That
PTSD.
right, or even not necessarily viewing the rest of us as sheep, but feeling that there is a level of things that we are not privy to that they are,
Right.
and that is the truth of the matter. There are things that they bore witness to that most of us will never have borne witness to.
And scales lifted from people's eyes. So that's what I like about, that's what drew me into Heart of Darkness, was that idea of witnessing the horror, and from there you're changed psychologically. And in fact, in the book itself, one scene that really stuck out to me was before Marlowe going into Africa, he met with a doctor. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
And so the quote was something to the effect of, the changes aren't physical, it's in the brain. People who go there don't come back the same. And so that psychological aspect drew me, and what keeps drawing me, I mean, rereading it for this episode, I thought, man, it really highlighted what I liked about narratives like this. Right.
Part 2, Apocalypse Now.
We'd be remiss, of course, if we don't, in the conversation of Heart of Darkness adaptations, if we don't mention Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, released in 1979, which is about Vietnam War. And what it's heralded as one of the best Vietnam movies. And so what this movie did was shifted, obviously, from the horrors of the ivory trade, into the horrors of the Vietnam War. So, are you familiar with Apocalypse Now, Jeffrey?
Only small parts of it.
It takes it takes a lot of the narrative structure from, obviously, Heart of Darkness, aside from just modernizing it, or at least shifting the timeline from the late 1800s to, the late 1980s. And I'm sorry, the 1960s. It also added the military aspect, wherein
Hmm.
where the Marlowe figure is actually tasked to kill Kurtz expressly, right? So it
Interesting.
there is a direct conflict between Marlowe and Kurt's figure in the movie, which is not particularly present in the novel, right?
Right. In the novel, you're looking to go and either resupply or pick up ivory or what have you with Mr. Kurtz.
And it just so happens that Marlowe heard about Mr. Kurtz, about how he's such a great person, how he's the center of the ivory trade and the heart. He's the best that ever was. And Marlowe decided,
An exceptional man.
an exceptional man. And you know what? I I have to talk to him now. And so what the movie does, aside from just being great, it's an amazing piece of cinema, and it's absolutely good. It does directly place the Marlowe figure at odds against Kurtz.
I'll find 3 hours out of my day. I know more about the production of Apocalypse Now than I know about Apocalypse Now. That's the funny part.
Right, right. So I mean, what, it was hellish, right? It was how long did it take for them to film it?
I'm not sure how long.
It no, it's some hellish. It went over budget. They got stuck in the jungle for so long. The production was plagued with errors and trouble.
Marlon Brando got fat, so he had to dress him in all black and put him in
Yeah,
shadows and stuff.
which I think, which is an excellent example of mistakes into miracles. The whole, with art born out of limitation, because it really does set a particularly grim visual, and it worked. It worked to its benefit.
That's exactly why, out of solidarity, I've gained 30 pounds.
Oh, see, there you go. Do it for Marlon. Do it for Marlon Brando.
Topic 3, Far Cry 2.
So, moving on to the adaptations themselves, since we've been talking about the origins, the genesis of these adaptations, the first on the list we're going to talk about is Far Cry 2. Far Cry 2 is the second in the Far Cry series, which actually itself has a very tortuous existence. It's a very interesting history, actually, the Far Cry 2. Are you familiar with Far Cry 2, Jeffrey?
I mean, I've seen some of it, some of the cutscenes and gameplay.
Right.
Read a story synopsis, yeah.
Okay, so the first Far Cry was not actually developed by Ubisoft. The first Far Cry was set in a deserted island, and you play as Jack. But the point is, the first Far Cry is completely different from Far Cry 2 and actually the rest of the series. And even then, Far Cry 2 actually, even within the Ubisoft Far Cry series, is kind of an outlier. It's kind of a freak, to be honest with you.
Yeah?
Have you played any of the other Far Cries?
No, I'm afraid not.
No, you haven't played Far Cry 3, 4, 5. I think we're on to 5 now, aren't we?
No, not at all.
Yeah, we're on to 5 now. But anyway, so Ubisoft, they're developed by Ubisoft, first-person shooter, open world shooters. Unfortunately, they kind of, after 2, they kind of followed a formula. I think you're familiar with the formula. I think they took the formula from Assassin's Creed. You know the series, the gameplay loop in Assassin's Creed, wherein you climb up a tower,
Yeah.
you press eagle vision,
Yeah,
You see everything.
you have like minor missions, which
Right.
are pretty bland usually, and then you have major missions, which are can vary in terms of creativity.
Right, right. So that's kind of what they turned into. I think Far Cry 3 onwards kind of did that. But Far Cry 2 is actually an odd duck because it came out in 2008. I know it's been a decade since 2008, and the tastes and priorities back then were still kind of different. Are you familiar with Crisis? Do you remember Crisis?
My graphics card remembers
Oh
Crisis.
yeah, everyone's PCs cried about Crisis. Don't worry, all right. Crisis isn't real. Crisis can't hurt you. But that was the benchmark, wasn't it? Crisis was the benchmark for PC graphics back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, for its time, it was it really pushed everything to the max, which I love. I love when developers kind of take something and not only looks forward to the next generation, but then leapfrogs their design over what should have been the next thing, and is like two steps ahead of everyone else.
Exactly. That's exactly. Crisis was such a game changer, right? Crisis was everyone wanted to be the next Crisis, or at least they wanted. They always ask what because Crisis had at the time, and I think even now, right? Crisis is still pretty much a looker, and not just the graphics, but the physics engine as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of simulationist elements to Crisis, when you have to calculate the what was it, the explosions and vegetation, water physics, and well, which brings us to a point. Far Cry 2 was around that time, right? And honestly, it takes a lot of the simulationist aspects of Crisis as well. It's
Hmm.
a lot of it's pretty tech demo-y. Do you get what I mean by it's kind of a tech demo?
In terms of like weather effects and such like.
No, absolutely. So in Far Cry 2, and there's a video on it where it just highlights the elements of Far Cry 2 that's actually quite insane, just detailed. Did you know that the vegetation in Far Cry 2, instead of a model change after it receives a damage threshold, like where you shoot a tree, keep shooting a tree, you could just have the tree turn into a different model.
Yeah.
But Far Cry 2 doesn't have that. What it does is actually, if you shoot a branch of a tree, that branch falls off.
Oh, okay.
It calculates that physics, that part of the tree, right?
Hmm.
That's what I mean by the tech demo-y parts of it. And so, which brings us back to why was it such an outlier, right?
Like just to talk about the setting, it was again in the Congo, so in that respect, very very similar to Heart of Darkness, and they actually went to Congo to do research on the setting, as I understand.
Right, right. So aside from just the setting, that whole spiel about tech demos, because if you just leave it at that, if you just have these elements just for the sake of these elements, I mean,
Mhm.
you're just trying to be impressive, right? But I think it marries into what the one of the directors said, or at least what the game set out to be, which is an adaptation of Heart of Darkness.
So when I went through and got the major cutscenes and saw the various endings, I didn't really see how this was a good adaptation because the Kurtz figure that you're hunting, known as the Jackal,
The Jackal.
right? You're sent there to, what is it, kill or capture the Jackal?
You were tasked to kill the jackal. So Far Cry 2, the basic plot of it is that kind of like Apocalypse Now, actually, which I think is where that
Hmm.
move of changing the Marlowe character into an assassin for the Kurtz character came from. Is that you are a mercenary and you're setting out to kill the jackal.
I suppose that's because of the medium, right? You don't want the player to be interested in the jackal just because it's an interesting person. You want to have some kind of goal to interact with the jackal, right?
Right, right. Well, what's funny is though, like as soon as you get to it, you get malaria, and the jackal actually saves you. The jackal actually, at several points in the game, actually saves you from.
I'm guessing he gives a speech. We're not so different, you and I.
Well, I mean, in a roundabout way, sure. After about what 30 hours of gameplay, eventually you do help out the jackal. Right. But to answer your question, or at least to answer the point I think you're trying to make, is that how is Far Cry 2 an adaptation of Heart of Darkness?
Mm-hmm.
So I read this article. It was posted came out 2009, and it's titled Far Cry 2 The Heart of Darkness Game by LB Jeffries, popmatters.com. One point that he made was that, that tech demo spiel I went on about earlier,
Yeah.
about the simulationist aspect of it? It carries more than just tree physics or fire physics. A term that I liked, actually, there's a term in the article, hostile game design.
Mm-hmm.
Hostile game design is kind of evocative. And so, case in point is that, what was it? The guns jam. The gun goes through
Oh,
wear and tear.
oh, that sounds awful.
The durability goes down and actually explodes. Sometimes it jams and you have to press reload. The enemies they react accordingly. They don't die from one or two shots. They go down and they writhe around. And sometimes they could pull a John McClane from you and just kind of feign death and start shooting at you.
Mm.
So this is part of that tech demo part of it where it's simulationist, and I think that transfers over to the quote unquote hostile game design. What the whole point of this is the game is out to get you, which is interpreted as you you're not actually the Marlowe character, you're actually the Kurtz in this particular instance, because the world is out to get you, so you do the efficiency for brutality.
Okay.
You become more efficient at being brutal because the world is out to get you.
I had that thought as well because throughout the game you can collect what briefcases of conflict diamonds.
Oh, absolutely, yes, you do. And in fact, that's how they pay you. That's how the factions pay you, is through conflict diamonds.
Here's one metric amount of blood diamonds. Don't spend it all in one place.
And you do some sick stuff, man. You as a character do some sick stuff in the course of the game.
So I mean that's very akin to the ivory trade, right?
Oh yeah, that is one parallel. That's true.
It's kind of the modern equivalent because of how valuable ivory was at the time. Kind of the equivalent to that nowadays would be conflict diamonds.
Right, right. And they made it a point that paper money is useless. So yeah, the only thing worth trading is conflict diamonds or diamonds in general. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you, right? So the jackal, in the end, his motivation for arming both sides, according to him, is ultimately altruistic. So, so yeah, the jackal was revealed all along to be altruistic, and you don't actually get a choice in the matter. You do help him out in the end.
In that case, it kind of diverges because Kurtz doesn't really have a redemption. He just kind of he just dies.
He does. He doesn't. So he did not, in a sense, get redeemed, right? But Marlowe kind of okay. We're going back to the discussion about Heart of Darkness. Marlowe lies for Kurtz.
Redemption through a lie.
Yeah. So I mean, because in some ways Marlowe becomes Kurtz. I mean, that's one aspect of Heart of Darkness. Kurtz lives on through Marlowe because of his writings and his that lie that he took. That he now shares the same outlook as Kurtz did when he went back to society. So maybe there's that parallel. You become the jackal because I mean you go out and become an agent for his methods at the end. So the end of it, The Jackal orchestrates the exodus of civilians,
Yeah.
and you either have a choice to either destroy the bridge so that the military forces coming after you don't get to chase you and just kind of lock everyone in. As he describes it, keep the cancer here. Or you have a choice. Do you want to escort the civilians and make the pinky promise that you're going to commit suicide so that, again, you don't infect the rest of the country? So that this it's contained, right? The cancer is contained within this fictional war-torn African country.
I wasn't as impressed with the ending, but now that you speak more about kind of the shifting of the narrative towards making the player character the Kurtz figure, I can I definitely see what they were going for
Right,
in Far
right.
Cry 2.
And if I may, Far Cry 2 is actually probably one of my favorite video games. Having played for it, it's been a month now. It's still kind of stuck in my head. Actually, it's pretty. It was an experience. It made me feel something. It made me feel something.
So, I mean, how did you feel about the end? I should ask, because since you actually played through to the end rather than me.
So I mean, in some ways, I kind of not dislike, but I'll be dishonest if I didn't say I didn't have the option of killing the jackal, in the sense that you don't have the ability to, and I like this word, that's why I'm going to say it, and this has actually been to repudiate what he's been saying.
Right,
You don't have the ability to extend or at least explore the extreme of becoming the Kurtz figure,
right.
where you become the bad man.
There's an aspect where you do get redeemed either way if you go forward.
You do, because again, in Far Cry 2, you commit horrendous things, and in fact, you actually betray your buddies. There's a buddy system. Like you grow connected, you grow attached to these mercenaries, these buddies, because in line with the simulationist aspects of this,
Mhm.
you have a safety net of sorts, wherein when you go down, you get shot and you die. Your buddy actually comes and saves you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a cutscene that plays, and he drags you and he shoots the people around, and he hands you a gun to help you out as well. And in fact, you also have a chance to save or kill your buddies if they do go down. So again, so you do grow attached to these buddies, but your buddies are just as much of a, because they're also mercenaries. They're in it for the money.
Yeah.
And there's a particular part in the game wherein you, in order to get the diamonds, to get the civilians out, you need the diamonds that these mercenaries have. So you do fight your buddies. So these friends that you made just shows you as well. You, and I wouldn't say betray them.
I mean, you kill him. I don't know what it's worse than betrayal than,
I,
oh,
that's
you
true.
saved my life. I'm gonna put a hole in you, buddy.
That's true. But then the diamonds are there to save the civilians, and they want the diamonds, and they just want to leave with the diamonds and leave the
Right.
civilians.
I mean, there is that aspect of you're doing evil for greater, perhaps greater good.
Right, right. Yeah, so Far Cry 2, I could see, I will say this, I could see why people would be turned off by it because of the quote unquote hostile game design. I could see, as a game, as a game, I could see why it would turn people off.
So I guess, yeah. So did you have any other parts you wanted to touch on?
I mean, there's also in the article itself. I really like this article. It's quite, I wouldn't say expansive, but it does bring up some good points. You actually play as one of the mercenaries. You yourself, the mercenaries that you betray, those are all actually playable characters. You could pick one of those to play as. And so they bring that up because the ability to just be one of those mercenaries highlights the fact that there's a facelessness. You could,
You're representative of
right,
being a mercenary in the
right,
in that area.
in that area. And so like you are it's a mirror, right? You are as self-centered as these guys at some point prior to you meeting the jackal. And I wouldn't say switch sides, but you do help out the Jackal.
I suppose in that regard, it is kind of like, okay, killing the other mercenaries is not the redemption arc, but is the ending of the traditional Kurtz figure, because you are killing the iterations of the mercenaries that were doing the atrocities
Right.
for diamonds, and they're the parts of the mercenaries that want to do it for profit.
And self-centered, self-interest, yes. So yeah, no, it's just interesting. Of course, this is all the last 15 minutes of the game, which the last section is actually called Heart of Darkness. Heart
Uh,
of Darkness. Yeah, this is Heart of Darkness. It's just neat. Which of course invites an examination between the game and the novel.
well, that's our show. We'll be back next time with part 2 of Heart of Darkness, where we will be examining Spec Ops the Line and how it relates to the novella. Thank you for listening, and a big thank you to our significant others for supporting us through this project.